Hey, welcome to Breaking the News Plus on this Wednesday night. We are going to spend some time talking about a case that we have been talking about for years. The Feeding Our Future fraud. It took another step forward today, and the person that's been reporting on it from the beginning for KARE 11 has been Lou Raguse. He joins us now. Hi, Lou.
Hi, how are you?
Good. So tell me, what step happened today?
This was a sentencing hearing for somebody named Abdiaziz Farah. And that's not as familiar of a name as like Amy Bach or even Salim Saeed, who stood trial with Amy Bach. But he's one of the most prolific defendants in this fraud scheme, not just on the fraud part of it, but he was the mastermind behind the bribe of a juror, another story that is related to this that we've reported extensively on. So he was the ringleader in the first group that went to trial, and they were mostly found guilty. That one had a couple not guilty verdicts in it. Mm-hmm. And then, but on the eve of deliberations, of course, there was this huge story that one of the jurors had a bag full of money dropped off at her door, instructing her to vote not guilty. Mm-hmm. And so he was the mastermind behind that. He's pleaded guilty to that. Today, he was sentenced, not for the bribe, but for his role in the fraud scheme. And he received a 28-year sentence, which is by far the longest sentence that any of these defendants have received so far.
Why did he get such a big sentence?
Because of the fact he was the mastermind. He was one of the very first people to begin participating in it. And the judge had some great questions during the hearing. She said, did he come up with this idea? Mm-hmm. And the prosecutor said, it's unclear whether he came up with it, whether Amy Bach came up with it, or whether groups of people came up with it together. But the fact remains he's one of the first people right on the onset of the pandemic. As soon as this program became available, he saw dollar signs not to do anything legitimately to try to feed meals to needy children, but to take advantage and steal money. And
so from the jump, it was always meant to be a fraud scheme.
Right from day one.
That they started to feed kids and said, hey, wait, we could
There's very few that even did that.
Okay.
And we've heard from them testifying in these trials. People get recruited in and think that they're going to legitimately do it and see that it's impossible, and then they start doing the fraud. There are some like that, but this guy, no. Right from the beginning, he was recruiting people to help him. He had a business partner. They had a restaurant down in Shakopee called Empire Cuisine and Market, mm-hmm. and they claimed to be serving hundreds of thousands of meals out of this tiny restaurant, which it was just absurd in the trial when you see how small their kitchen is, that it was impossible. And just thousands of text messages sent between him and the co-defendants, and none of them are about food. They're all about move this amount of money to this account, move this money to this account. It was very clear that it was a sophisticated scheme right from day one from this guy. And so during the trial, the judge had the prosecutor specify, where does he stand in this whole thing? And acting U.S. Attorney Joe Thompson said that he's right up there with Amy Bach and Salim Saeed as one of the most prolific defendants in this case.
So a big step forward for her to have that sentencing today. But Lou, talk a little bit about, you just mentioned the acting U.S. Attorney Joe Thompson. He revealed something today in terms of the scope of this fraud, what we come to know as the Feeding Our Future fraud, but it's actually bigger than what we even know now?
Yes, and this was something I've been wanting to nail down for some time now because I knew that it was bigger than this. So go back to the first press conference where U.S. Attorney Andy Lugar at that time announced it, and he said it's the $250 million Feeding Our Future meal fraud scheme. Mm-hmm. And that's the number that we've all gone with since then. Mm-hmm. What that actually meant was $250 million is what this nonprofit sponsor called Feeding Our Future, that's how much fraud money was going through them.
Okay.
And they weren't the only ones, though, that were sponsoring these so-called meal sites. And so there's another group, not different than Feeding Our Future, which is called Partners in Nutrition. And I don't know the total number of money off the top of my head that went through Partners in Nutrition, but it included this $50 million that Abdiaziz Farah and his co-defendants stole, and tens of millions more from others. So it's over $100 million under Partners in Nutrition on top of the $250 million that went through Feeding Our Future. So Joe Thompson told us it's well over $300 million of total fraud and potentially more than $400 million.
So could we see a whole new crop of people, or are the Partners in Nutrition suspects, for lack of a better word, the same people as the Feeding Our Future?
They're not the same. And that was my follow-up question. Are any of the Partners in Nutrition people going to be held accountable? And kind of the standard line, which Joe Thompson gave, that he has to give, is that it's an ongoing investigation. We don't comment on, people that haven't been charged yet. However, we are continuing to investigate, and we just charged a new person last night, which they did.
Was that I just got an email. 76.
That'll have to be the next thing that we talk about after we get through this Partners in Nutrition thing. So just one more note on that. No one from this Partners in Nutrition group has been charged.
Oh, wow.
However, I did a full interview way back when this whole thing started with the executive director of Partners in Nutrition, which is essentially the Amy Bach of Partners in Nutrition. And so she sat down with me for a full interview and answered every question that I asked, and said that they didn't know of any fraud going on. Well, we know so much more since I did that interview, and there was a lot of fraud going through there. I suppose it'll just be a matter of whether they can prove that she or others in that group knew that this fraud was going on, or if it was just happening under their noses.
So for those under the impression that this Feeding Our Future saga is wrapping up, these defendants are all going to jail, it could begin anew with the investigation into Partners in Nutrition doing a similar type of scheme.
We're up to 73 total people charged so far, and more than 50 of them have been convicted. So that leaves, about 20 or maybe a little less that are still kind of pending. Some of them are going to fight it and go to trial. Some are still working out the details of like a plea agreement or whatever. So we're not even done with those initial people, but there potentially could be a whole other crop, and we don't know how many. But if they go down that road, there could be a lot that are still going to be charged.
Yeah, I mean, it just
becomes a question of where does it begin and where does it end?
Just how you read my mind. That was my question. I'm like, well, does this ever end? And that's kind of part of investigatory work. I think I made up a word there. We were just talking to the I-Team producer Kelly Dietz the other day about the housing issues and shutting down HSS, and she was saying the same thing. Once you meet one person and then there's another person, and then it just starts to crack open.
Yeah, and so one thing that's I think different about this Feeding Our Future case than other kind of fraud cases that we report on, like that one. This was a program that was expanded during the pandemic specifically because they anticipated the possible need for all these children to be fed that are in need because they weren't in school.
A real concern.
Yes.
Yes.
However, the schools still did provide meals. Like they had legitimate meal sites where kids can go and pick up bag meals.
Right. The districts.
And so as it turned out, this need really wasn't there, at least not nearly to the scope in which it was feared. And so there really aren't that many legitimate ones that popped up and said, we are, really serving kids here. That was being done by the school districts.
Right.
And so with the housing fraud, I've heard, and we talked about, some of these legitimate nonprofits that are doing the work to help people find stable housing, and they are, caught up because this program got shut down. So their funding is cut off and they're not able to do the legitimate work anymore. When the Feeding Our Future thing was shut down, there really weren't legitimate people that were left in the lurch.
Interesting. So I've always been curious and haven't spent time to do the legwork to figure it out. And perhaps maybe you don't. It's okay if you don't. This fraud has made national, if not international, headlines for its scope. And it's a COVID-related program that had good intentions, good idea, I guess we could say, and that it was largely used for fraud. Did other states do this, or are we the only one that created this type of reimbursement system to feed kids?
It was a national program, so this potentially could have been going on in other states, but we just haven't heard of any of the same kind of fraud going on.
Meaning they haven't looked, or just we had fraudsters?
I guess I just don't know if we don't know if there are fraudsters in other states. So, there's nobody been charged from other states.
Gotcha.
And so, was it going on? It just hasn't been caught. We don't know the answer to that.
This particular man today, remind me his name again?
Abdiaziz Farah.
And so today was sentencing. He'd already been found guilty. And you alluded to that second story that came out about the bribe, which was, you used the term mastermind. I mean, I don't know, Hallmark bag full of cash in front of a juror's house is not a great idea. Will he be penalized for that too, or is that kind of all looped into the sentence he got today?
He will be penalized for that, and the presumption will be that it will be added on to the 28 years, so it'll be a back-to-back sentence. He could get up to 10 more years. Won't be all of that, but he'll definitely get more years in prison, and they expect that it'll be added on and not served concurrently. When it came to, he spoke in court today, and it was strange because he did apologize for the bribe, and he was apologizing to the judge, and he said that he panicked, he was depressed, and thought that he had to take matters into his own hands and made this huge mistake. But he never apologized specifically for the fraud, and he just kind of like left all that out. He apologized to his family and to his community, the Somali community in Minneapolis, many supporters there for him today, apologized for letting everyone down, but didn't apologize for the actual fraud that he committed. And that's all he was being sentenced for today. So I noticed it. And then sure enough, when the judge spoke afterwards, she said, well, I couldn't help but notice you apologized for the bribe, but not for what you're here for today. And I'm not sentencing you for the bribe. I'm sentencing you for the fraud. So she just was pointing out this lack of apology, and everyone
right. That doesn't make
it.
sense. Mm-hmm. Like, you can apologize for the bribe when you get sentenced for that, but seemingly no remorse.
It seems to be, sad that he got caught, and sad that he, did this to his family and stuff like that, but not necessarily sad for what he did. And it is worth noting that he sent millions of dollars overseas to Kenya, which the U.S. cannot take back. And there have been several suspects that did the same thing and willingly said, I will sell this property that I bought in Kenya. And they've even been given permission to fly over there and facilitate the sale and give that money back to the U.S. Multiple suspects have done that because they know it'll help them once they're sentenced. Maybe I won't go to prison for as long. But Abdiaziz did not want to do that.
Why?
He wanted to keep the money. His family's rich.
In Kenya?
Yes, or they could go over to Kenya and, use the property that's there.
So there's no recourse for the U.S. to go?
No. They seized all the property he bought in the U.S., which included a couple lake lots that he was going to build a multi-million-dollar home, some commercial property in other states, 5 or 6 luxury cars. They got all that back, and then now that he's sentenced, they can sell that stuff and get money back from it. But they can't take something that is in Kenya.
Last question, big picture, what's next?
What's next? So, there was one more person that was just charged, so I'll touch on that quickly. That's the 73rd person to be charged. This was somebody we reported on in St. Paul who had a nonprofit where they were teaching underprivileged kids how to code and received lots of accolades because it's a minority-owned business in St. Paul helping disadvantaged kids. Politicians got behind it, gave them, kudos for it. Corporations like 3M and Target, St. Paul Foundation gave money to them, grants. They took lots of grant money.
Whoa. And
they also claimed to serve meals to kids and took $3 million from the government.
Whoa.
So that guy got charged now. So he's the latest suspect. That case just starting from scratch. So what comes next now is that there's still a couple, I would say, like prolific defendants that have a trial that's on the calendar. We'll see if it actually happens or if they end up pleading guilty. But they have to make their way through these last 20 or so defendants and then decide how many more they're going to charge.
Far from over is the short answer. All right. Well, Lou, we appreciate you talking to us tonight on The Plus, and we appreciate your work on this. I'm sure we'll talk again.
You're welcome.
Yep. That's all for us on The Plus. We'll see you back here tomorrow night.